And it is exactly 2 o'clock on this Tuesday afternoon, the 31st of May of the year 2022. I welcome you to this month on the agenda webinar of the European Liberal Forum, the political foundation and think tank of the ALDE party. Today, we are focusing on the current energy conundrum and pathways to energy independence for Europe. The Russian war on Ukraine urges us to review our energy supply and to look at alternative solutions, especially also looking at the different sanction packages that are being discussed within the European Union and the necessity to work around the dependency, not only from Russia, but potentially also from other not so democratic regions where the European Union and European Union member states are discussing getting their future energy from. My name is Daniel Kadek. I'm the executive director of the European Liberal Forum, and I'm very glad that we can discuss this matter here today with fantastic partners, for instance, Cleantech for Europe, that is joining us today. So can Cleantech be the solution to help EU reach net zero? Is Cleantech a solution to get out of the energy conundrum that we have? So from investing in increasing the energetic contributions of renewable sources of our energy consumption, is Cleantech a solution for that? Is Cleantech a solution to our energy storage and the storage project development? And is investing in our gas and electric infrastructure, how to do that within the Cleantech framework? These are matters that might be discussed today. So this webinar will look at the challenges and opportunities that clean technologies provide and can offer in the medium and long term. So we want to discuss alternative solutions to a more energy independent European Union and the path to get there. This ELF webinar is today hosted by Jules Besnano, the Executive Director of Cleantech for Europe. We have a couple of fantastic guests that Jules kindly will introduce after I'm done. But before I go, I would like to thank very much our speakers in advance for what I know will be a very interesting debate. I would like to thank our partners and especially Jules today for being with us and driving us through the treacherous waters of this interesting topic. And last but not least, I would like to thank the audience for being with us on this Tuesday afternoon. If you have not subscribed to our newsletters and our social media, shame on you, but there's a very simple solution to that. Please subscribe. Thank you very much for all of you for being here, and Jules, you have the floor.
Many thanks to you, Daniel, and to the broader team at the European Liberal Forum for hosting this really important discussion. My name is Jules Besnano. I'm the Executive Director of Cleantech for Europe, and I have the absolute pleasure of moderating today's discussion. Just a quick note on logistics, that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on social media after we're done. A quick word on Cleantech for Europe. We represent the vibrant ecosystem of EU cleantech innovators and investors who are developing the technologies not only to take us to net zero, but also to energy independence, which is the topic of the day, as well as to industrial leadership in the decades to come. We represent 20 pioneer cleantech venture and growth capital investors with a track record of investing in more than 350 ventures for decarbonization and sustainability, one of which is with us today in the person of Laura. Our mission is really to bridge the gap between clean technologies on the one hand and policymaking on the others, to make sure that the EU creates the conditions for a new industry to emerge. The key challenge we'll be discussing today is really how the EU can reach energy independence and what role can clean technologies play to accelerate this transition. So to set the stage, just in a few words, obviously the invasion of Ukraine requires us to stop importing energy from Russia. And an immediate reaction is to obviously buy this energy from friendlier nations. And obviously that's good. But it's important to keep in mind that building new fossil infrastructure really keeps us locked into an old energy system and on track to a climate crisis. And it also creates stranded assets that may not be valuable in only a few years' time. So obviously, renewables could fill most of that gap without the need for additional fossil fuel infrastructure, as demonstrated by recent studies by E3G, for instance. But it's true that renewables face intermittency and seasonality issues. So to succeed, they really need to be part of a broader systemic overhaul of our energy system, including electrifying demand, but also building energy storage capabilities, as you were reminding us, Daniel, and then reinvesting in our electric and gas infrastructure. So this is where EU Cleantechs come in. So I'll be thrilled today to ask three key questions of our panelists. The first one is, what are the key technologies that we need to reach energy security? How ready are these technologies to take over from the old energy system? And three, what policy support do they need to scale and succeed? So to answer these questions, today's fantastic panel includes leaders from the policy world, with MEP Claude Jägermann from Austria, who led the European Parliament's last report on energy storage. And so it's really one of the best placed people to speak on this topic. She's also a strong supporter of innovation and the energy transition. So really thrilled to have you with us. And the panel also includes leaders from the cleantech space, with Guido D'Alessi, who is the CEO of LSTOR, a leading scale-up on long-duration energy storage, and Laura Kramer, who's an investment director at Rubio Impact Ventures, which is a fund based in the Netherlands that is part of this Cleantech for Europe initiative. So we'll start with brief opening remarks from our panelists and then move to the discussion of the day. Claudia, we'd like to invite you to take the floor first, if that's okay with you.
Of course. Thank you, Jules, and thanks a lot for giving me the possibility to be amongst this very interesting group of people. I'm really looking forward to hearing from everybody. And I possibly have the least interesting things to say, because I do know that there are huge questions that have to be answered by policymakers, obviously. But I think right now is really the time to listen in on how to implement and what is needed or what could be done on the short term. I think you put it into perspective very well, Jules, by saying by explaining how the situation has changed. And I think if this is not the wake-up call for all European member states to really overhaul their energy policy as a whole, and to try and find also a new narrative to explain what energy security really means to their people, then I don't know what else we would need as a turning point, or to find a turning point in a way forwards to not only energy independence, but climate neutrality. The fact that fossil fuels have not only become one of the drivers of climate change, but one of the actually main instruments of war that Vladimir Putin is using in his illegal war of aggression against Ukraine should give everybody at least a moral incentive to really look at a way of trying to change their policies. But we are fighting two battles at the same time, I guess, in terms of energy policy. And we have to make clear that we have to get out of oil and gas faster than ever, also to save lives, not just to save the planet from climate change, which in the medium term also means saving lives, but to save the lives of the people, of our neighbors that are dying because of a fossil fuel financed war. One of the main things, I guess, is not just the fact, and I think this is, again, something that we have to be aware of in the discussion, that our problem is not only the dependence on the fossil fuels coming from Russia, but our fossil dependence in general. It's not the problem that the gas is coming from Russia, but that we are so dependent on it coming from Russia and on it in general. And I think just driving up, goals will not bring us out of this crisis. And this is what the European Green Deal has been about so far. We have been good, I think, at setting goals, at paving a way of how it could look like. But we are right now in the Parliament, at least, trying to push through our positions for the so-called Fit for 55 package of this legislature, that it's really coming down to a tough fight of, are we really willing to go all the way in what it means, how can we achieve these goals? Because right now they're just being, it's a fantasy, it's fiction, if we're not willing to go all the way and willing to implement and to make also the harder choices when it comes to really translating these goals into real life policy change. And the policy change means what was once gas will then be another source of heat. What was once a gas fired electricity plant will be a renewable plant, but that needs to happen. And also the changes, and you mentioned electrifying demand, I think that it will be one of the key challenges that needs to happen everywhere. And I think maybe something that we also have to talk about right now, when people all over Europe are fighting against inflation and fighting against higher prices, when heating has become almost impossible for some people to pay for, we have to make sure that we're also telling the story that a renewables-based Europe is a Europe that people can actually live in. It's a Europe that people can afford. It means heat that people can afford, and it means electricity that people can afford. So what do we read right now? I'm just going to go through some of the highlights that I think everybody has heard a couple thousand times probably, but it doesn't hurt to repeat it as often as possible. Obviously, faster and simpler approval procedures. That is something that the EU can obviously say to member states, it should happen, but it really is something that has to happen on a local level, actually, and on a national level, and it means changing lots of national policies. We need to really translate our, centralized production-based system into a decentralized renewables-based system that has a strong grid that is supported by sustainable storage solutions. And we need to have increased investments in renewable energy sources. And I want to focus on the heating sector, because that I also think is what's let's just say the political storytelling has to talk about, because when people think about gas, I think they think about heat in their homes. Obviously, it's also troubling for the industry. I think we all agree here. But for people to really understand what the renewable energy transition means for them, I think we have to all explain it by the example of heating. A large part of European households are dependent on natural gas for heating, and I think it will cost us dearly in the coming winter. And we're noticing this right now in the debate that has happened this week in the Council. So we have to push for sustainable alternatives such as heat pumps and district heating starting today. I think just like in any times of war, everybody who has capacities to offer should be investing and should be building these technologies, the infrastructure that we need, and should be on a way to install a heat pump and solar panels. I think this is just, I don't understand why we're not mobilizing everything that we have to make sure that the dependency next winter will be less than it is now. Something that we're working on to really incentivize this through, goals and what we can do in the European level is, of course, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive that really tries to incentivize having a more sustainable building sector, especially when it comes to heat, to have affordable clean heat in insulated homes across the European Union. Some countries and cities are developing ambitious fossil fuel-free heating solutions, and I think we can learn from them. The Dutch government has set out a really ambitious plan that I think other countries should look at to connect 1.5 million households to new heating systems by 2030. And it is a promise to people, and that is what I like about it politically, because this is something that where the people can, in the end, turn on their government if they're not delivering on the promises that they have been given. And in the capital of my own country, in Vienna, it is successfully investing in geothermal energy to try and supply the district heating system that is already in place in the city and will be developed further in the future. I think many governments should learn from these examples and try and invest on large-scale sustainable heating solutions for people living, especially in urban areas. But obviously, it's also possible in suburbia, where I live, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, where people could use geothermal energy to have sustainable heating in their homes. And maybe to wrap this up, a couple of more words on energy storage, since we have Guido here today, and so very excited to hear from him. I have been saying this for years now. We need a stronger European approach on energy storage. We have highly efficient new technologies that are there, but they need more support to be deployed on a large scale. And I think they have to be part of the architecture and the design of how we see the future of the energy system that we need today. We emphasized in the European Parliament resolution on energy storage, on the initiative report, to really see the potential of storage as an alternative to the traditional grid expansion. And back then in 2020, there was just at the start of the pandemic, we called on the Commission to develop a comprehensive strategy on energy storage to enable the transformation, to be like the key enabling technology for the energy transition and for a renewables-based economy. Sadly, the Commission still hasn't come up with that strategy, but we're ringing the bell on it and try and call them up on their promises also on this regard. We tried to push for better, more sustainable solutions in the revision of the 10E regulation, but there is a lack of awareness for this topic in Brussels in general, but I think also a little bit in the Commission. They are not immune to thinking in silos, and they're not immune to their biases, but this is what we are for, to try and remind them of what they're missing in their thinking. I'm confident that we have everything that we need in terms of know-how and what we have to know, and in terms of technologies that can be deployed today. But we have to change the way that we look at it. The energy transition is not optional, and we don't have any more time to waste or to spare. It needs to happen now, and it is also a question of the future of the European economy. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from the others now and as to how this can happen in practice.
Thank you so much for, I think you've set up the discussion perfectly. One, on mentioning this turning point, I think that's a really good frame. And then on giving us all the challenge to raise the awareness level, which I think is absolutely critical, both on storage and on technologies like geothermal. I have a lot of follow-up questions, but maybe before we get there, we will move on to Guido and Laura for their introduction words, please. Guido, do you want to carry on?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jules. Thanks for having the opportunity to speak in this event. My name is Guido D'Alessi. I am the CEO of Alastor, a Dutch scale-up, actually a very fast-growing company that has developed a new storage technology for electricity. If you don't mind, I will share a few slides just to introduce ourselves. I'm not going to give you the sales talk, don't worry. So Alastor is a Dutch-based company which developed electricity storage system for large and very large installations. So grid scale size you have to look at. Obviously, this is the immediate demand, and we see that in the Netherlands to become really urgent with a lot of net congestion. The immediate applications are with large-scale PV and large-scale wind parks, each of them inducing a lot of grid congestion, and this is destabilizing the system. We also see that this kind of technology would be an ideal candidate to substitute fossil power plants. That looks like a moonshot or a wild dream, but we see that already happening in the world. A good example is the Moss Landing project in California, where a complete gas-fired power plant was replaced by a big battery. And yeah, due to the fact that we use hydrogen as one of the active materials in the battery, we can also make a really nice integration with hydrogen infrastructures and electrolyzers. So this battery basically bridges the two religions of battery storage and hydrogen production, and it can really play a good role to bring these worlds together, actually. So our technology is a flow battery using hydrogen and bromine as active materials. That's what I wanted to share about Elastory. Yeah, it's clear that, and I'm happy that Claudia already stressed this point so heavily. Storage seems to be the missing link. In the Netherlands, we see much more often, almost on a weekly basis, very negative electricity prices. That's due to total overproduction of renewable energy, while on other days there is hardly anything generated, and this is where storage comes in. Actually, if it's interesting, I can share a link on the chat. We did an assessment of how could we replace the current electricity system in the Netherlands with sun, wind, and solar, and to what kind of magnitudes would that lead. And to be honest, I was positively surprised that this does not seem to be unrealistic. So to completely decarbonize this and to have the same reliability as we have, because we are, of course, spoiled with a very stable grid. I have 2 more slides if they want to move to the next one. To give you a bit of an idea, a bit of a feeling of magnitude of what the storage market is about, and then I'm focusing on long duration energy storage. So in other words, grid storage. And if you look what has been published in the past years, there are all kinds of different predictions, varying from 10 terawatt hour by 2040 by EIA, I should say. Last year, McKinsey published a really interesting report on long duration energy storage, predicting up to 140 terawatt hour to be needed by 2040. And our own analysis goes even further for 2050 up to 500 terawatt hours. So these are really huge opportunities. Whoever is right in predictions, for sure we will need hundreds of terawatt hours to be stored, and that really gives massive opportunities to make this energy transition. So the need is definitely there. Last slide, just as an example to give you an idea of Europe, and then I'm just looking at the PV market, what has been predicted to be installed on utility scale, and not the single households, but just the utility scale PV. That's 16.4 to 21.1 gigawatts PV. In US, you can see that the ratio storage versus PV is about 1.123. So if we would assume that same ratio, we can get an idea of what storage capacity would be necessary in Europe. And so we are talking about up to 70 gigawatt hours. I mean, that's massive. And then I'm only talking about co-location with PV. You know, there's also a huge wind capacity, which is even much larger. So these are the orders of magnitude that we are looking at. So to summarize a bit, as you see, the technologies are there. It's not only Elastory, there's a variety of different storage technologies coming up, really nice innovations, each finding their place somewhere in the market. And along with that, also the need is there. And it's even more. We are not only moving towards an energy transition, we are also moving to energy independency. And since early this year, when this thing in Ukraine started, I get this message from a lot of my customers. It's not only about return on investment, it's also about being independent, to be as much as possible self-supporting. So yeah, the technologies are there, opportunities are there. What does it take now to bring this a step further and really realize this and complete this energy transition? I think that's the topic of today. Maybe to go a bit into that, I think Claudia already mentioned this or touched this point. we need an energy storage directive on EU level. I think that is still missing. It's on EU level, but it's also on Dutch national level. We have seen that incentive programs for PV and wind have been very successful. Now I believe we need the same incentive programs for storage deployments. There are also some hurdles in the energy regulations, the roles of TSOs and DSOs. And lastly, also permitting procedures are taking very long, especially with innovations. There's no legislation, there's no permission procedure ready, and we are confronted with really long procedures to deploy our technology. Maybe to finalize, I before we started this meeting, I took a look at how other markets are doing this outside EU, and I found, for instance, that in the UK, ministers passed a legislation that allows battery storage to bypass what is called the nationally significant infrastructure project. In essence, this means that storage projects above 50 megawatts in England and 350 megawatts in Wales can proceed without approval through national planning regime. So in other words, procedures are made simpler and faster. And the UK is one of the countries in Western Europe that suffers most from curtailment and has the biggest grid congestion. So of course, they are the front runner there to take these steps. Another example, and then I stop, is looking at the USA market. In some regions, storage, the deployment of storage is mandatory above a certain PV or wind capacity installation. So that immediately creates a hard need and demand for storage. And I believe these are a few points that I would like to bring up to speed up and make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guido. And this is a brilliant introduction to our storage topic. And maybe as a follow-up for later, would be really keen to hear your thoughts on how do we design this market, right? How do we build the business models for energy storage to be widely rolled out? Because today we're not really sure kind of who should pay for this. How do we turn this into interesting investments? So really keen to hear your thoughts on that. But before then, let's go to Laura. Absolutely thrilled to have you with us today, Laura. If you could give us a bit of an introduction on Rubio, and then on your thoughts on the variety of technologies we need to get to energy security.
Sure, happy to. So hi, everybody. Great to be here. My name is Laura Kramer. I'm a founding member of Rubio Impact Ventures. And we started with Rubio about 8 years ago with a mission to show that the financial industry, that investing can be done differently. So by proving actually that investing in impactful companies also generates great financial returns. It was about time, I'd say. So currently we invest out of our second fund, which is 110 million euros. And we invest in early stage ventures across Europe. Investing entrepreneurs actually like Guido. So entrepreneurs that have a scalable solution that really moves the needle, that solves one of the largest, that solves our largest societal issues that we're facing. And so what we do differently from industry practice is that before we invest, we quantify how much impact can this company make. So in Cleantech, you often talk about CO2, about carbon footprint. This is something we quantify with our entrepreneurs, and we hold ourselves accountable as well via our own remuneration. So within Rubio, I lead the circular solutions investments, meaning that I see, I think, over 300 companies per year that either accelerate the energy transition or that contribute to our circular economy. And I can tell you there's great entrepreneurial talent in Europe. So there's no problem there, I'd say. So yeah, today's topic is really close to my heart, as I believe the drive for energy independence, it can really help the EU both accelerate the transition to net zero, but also I think it's a big opportunity to create a competitive advantage as the EU with the technologies and industries that are out there to really be like the front runner on these technologies worldwide. There's so many great solutions, so many great entrepreneurs. Like, look about Guido, it's unique what he's been doing here. And I think in the EU, we will set ourselves apart from the rest of the world if we focus on this. So I'd say, as mentioned by Claudia and Guido, more renewables alone is not the answer. I really think we need a smarter system, a smarter energy system to facilitate this, this clean energy transition in a sustainable but also effective way. So with Cleantech for Europe and our other Cleantech investors in Europe, we've identified some challenges and looked at like what technologies are already available. And there's so many of them. So what I'd like to do today is to share some examples of those companies to give a gist of what's happening in the market. And also to show that the technologies are here. What we need is the right EU support, the right regulatory support to get them to scale. And that's actually action we need to take today, because a lot of these technologies need time to develop and get to scale. And we need them like full speed running in 2030. So this is not something we should wait with. So it's funny, like the examples I thought of, they link pretty much to Claudia's story because it's a lot about heat. And heat is actually something not a lot of people talk about, but it's so important to actually be able to get to net zero. So when we talk, for example, about the challenge that we have to reduce energy demand and continue to electrify, there's amazing technologies available for homes to actually make those more efficient. I think Claudia was talking about isolation, like really easy ways of getting there. But an example I was thinking of is the company De Warmte. I'll post the names of the companies later in the chat for you to have a look at them. But this company is actually providing an efficiency solution for existing homeowners. So not per se new build, but also existing homes. Because the average temperature of water leaving your home to the sewage, entering in the sewage, is 26 degrees. Like 26 is a lot for heat just leaving your home without any added benefit. So what the Warmte does is it enables homeowners to capture that heat and actually use it for your own home. So you will reduce your energy bill, but also gas dependency. So I thought that was a really great example of just an innovative solution to help homeowners reduce energy bills, but also make ours less dependent on gas. Then a second area of change is we have to modernize our energy supply and think about storage. So I think storage, I can't tell that better than Guido. Great examples also about like the scale of what we'll need. But also very interesting topic is, I think, the industrial sector that has a lot of heat for fueling their processes. And industrial heat is super difficult to decarbonize. You have biomass, like Claudia, I really don't like that in terms of like the CO2 footprint. Electrification is often way too expensive or not even feasible for the heat required in these industrial processes. And hydrogen infrastructure is a solution for the future, but before we have the infrastructure and the grid connections necessary for all these industries, we're, I think, beyond 2030 by a long run. So luckily, there's innovations that can already provide a solution today. So there's a company in Eindhoven, it's called Rift. And what they develop is basically a new carbon-free fuel based on iron fuel. So they use iron powder to fuel boilers. The end product is rust, and you can transform rust again with waste hydrogen back to iron powder. So there's also really nice circularity in the system. And it's, in terms of energy density, on par with coal. So it's really great for providing that requirements of industrial heat. And what I love about a solution like this, it's a really new way of creating a fuel system, which could also provide a unique opportunity for Europe to basically develop a whole new industry. The last topic I wanted to share is that we have to fix our grid, but do it in a smart way. We can obviously, if we find enough people, put a lot of new cables in the ground and make them bigger and bigger. But there's a huge potential of untapped flexibility in Europe that can actually reduce the need to put bigger cables in the ground, and hence also enable us in the EU to spend our money more effectively in the energy transition. So in the future, you can think about batteries, but also EVs, heat pumps. But even now, we already have like massive amounts of flexibility available in the form of industrial assets. So a great example of this is, for example, SimPower, a company that's working in different markets, but also in Greece and Spain, to help the local governments open up their energy markets for new players, flexibility scalers like this, to unlock their energy intensive assets to balance the electricity grid, not with gas plants, but with existing industrial assets. So I think in short, I see many, many ways of how the EU can embrace these innovations to reach its goals. And I definitely agree with all the points mentioned by Guido and Claudia on how regulation can accelerate this. I think two specific things I noticed in my work with a lot of entrepreneurs is that if you want technologies to scale across Europe, we really need to harmonize regulation and incentives. For example, flexibility markets. If SimPower wants to scale to different countries, they will have to change their business models because not all markets are open in the same way, or they have different requirements. This is really challenging, like if you look at all the other elements that an entrepreneur has to think about for growing a company. Another topic I think is super important for the EU is to stop the free allowances of carbon credits. Because I think carbon credits, if properly priced carbon, can really provide both new business models for ventures, but also it can create urgency, demand for incumbents to embrace new solutions. So I think there's a lot of opportunities out there, and I'm really looking forward to discuss that with you in the rest of this session. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Laura. And maybe I'll start with a follow-up question to you directly. One of the questions I raised in the beginning was the level of maturity of some of these technologies, because we're used to hearing about these cool ideas being developed in the EU, but just would like your assessment as an investor of are all of these technologies you mentioned kind of relatively close to ready to be deployed? Could they have a significant impact by next winter, the following winter, and by 2027?
Definitely, I think there's a wide range of technologies out there in different stages of maturity, but I would say the majority is ready for deployment and are already actively put in the market. I think especially now that you see the grid congestion and the urgency from energy dependency, that also gives a big push to all these technologies. But obviously there's a couple that are a bit further away, like the one I mentioned with iron fuel, that's obviously still in an earlier stage of development. I would have to look at Guido, but I think a lot of the battery development technologies are getting to maturity, but still need development to get to this super low cost of energy.
Right. Guido, maybe to you in terms of the level of maturity, I think you've repeated a couple of times that the technology is ready. Where are we in terms of deployment of batteries or long duration energy storage batteries in the EU today? And are we on the cusp of a much bigger rollout?
Yeah, well, I can obviously mostly speak for myself. Ellastor was founded in 2014, and we spent the first 7 years to develop this technology really from the ground up. Last year, we entered the market with the first commercial deals, being an agreement with the company Royal Vopak, maybe known to the audience as one of the largest storage companies in seaport terminals, storing molecules, not electrons. And their facility has the perfect infrastructure to build really large flow batteries. With flow batteries, you need also big tanks. Without going into more details, but that is the relationship with and the attractiveness of these seaport terminals. So that has led to an agreement to build a battery of 250 megawatt hours in a few steps. Yeah, the company is at the verge of a very fast growth, very close to finalizing a very large investment round. And that will enable us to speed up production and to automate the production and to expand the company. So that's actually the stage where we are. It will still take 1 or 2 years before these systems are just, regular products built every day. But we are at the verge of entering that stage, and have a pipeline of commercial contracts at this point. So it will need some time, but we're almost there.
And could you touch briefly maybe on the question of cost that was raised by Laura, and also I think I mentioned the question of market design. I don't know if you have a relatively quick answer for us, but be curious, for instance, in this case, with Vopak, kind of how do these typically roll out?
Yeah, I think the statement of Laura was quite accurate. Also, Alastor is a company that needs to mature, but then especially on the cost side, that is reached with economies of scale. Until today, we have been building the systems with our own team, close to 30 employees today. But of course, that's too expensive. It takes too long. It really takes quite an investment to automate the production of these systems to really large scale. The current plan even includes a gigawatt factory in 5 years from now. Potentially, the cost of these systems can be a factor lower than we think we can reach for lithium ion. It's a different market for lithium than for long duration energy storage, of course, but that's the kind of benchmark that is handled in the market. So potentially this technology can be extremely cheap, but we need to reach scale. And that is where the government and the EU could help us, because reaching scale means that we need large demand and affordable, so incentivize the adoption and deployment of storage technologies. Then we will reach the scale. The systems will become cheaper over time, and so this would only be a temporary incentive program in order to get the ball rolling. That's a complicated thing because there are many stakeholders, there are many people who play a role. If I go to, for instance, a farmer in the Netherlands who wants to buy a battery because his grid connection is far too small, he will tell me, well, why should I pay for this battery while the actual problem is not mine, but is of the grid operator? Or actually it's a national problem. Why should I pay this bill? So it's quite complex. I think for those kind of situations, we would need a solution to make it acceptable, at least for this farmer, to still adopt this technology. And once we get the ball rolling, I'm pretty sure that storage can be extremely cheap.
So thank you for taking us back on the route to policy. And so with that, I will go back to Claudia. Claudia, so you've now heard of a number of interesting technologies with storage, obviously, as the one we're featuring most today. I'd love to hear from you your assessment of the latest Repower EU communication that came out last week in this context. Do you think it reflects your the way you call it, meaning the big turning point, or do you think it can be made much bolder, and if so, in what way?
I agree with what is laid out in Repower, but I have to underline what I said in the beginning. I think I think in the public perception, many are misunderstanding that the responsibility to actually put this into practice lies with the member states. While there are some big parts of European energy policy that are European competence, the fact that who's responsible for building the infrastructure, decides the energy mix, lies 100% with the member states themselves. And I think a lot of the responsibility to really bring this repower plan to life will be at the member state level. And I once again see how many of them are pushing responsibility towards a European level and asking for changes that they themselves could implement. One of the examples is the permitting problem that is there. But if I look at some of the projects in Austria, for example, that had problems with permitting, it was pretty much national legislation and even national policies or national decision making that led to these projects being delayed. Many renewables have to fight against lots of not in my backyard problems, with local resistance coming against, oh, they're so ugly, or oh, I don't want to have this, and why can't it be in the next village, or why does it have to be in front of my house? And there's a huge responsibility, I think, with local decision makers, local politicians, that will have to explain to people why this infrastructure is needed. I think there has to be an open process about it. But what I also notice on a European level, not all member states have these problems. If I talk to many Scandinavian colleagues, they look at me with a strange look on their face asking, why is this a problem? Why don't people want to have a renewables infrastructure? And I tell them, I have no idea. It looks to be also a problem in political culture, whether or not politicians are willing to put to make this their own issue, to really put their own mandate and their own job on the line for these important projects to go through. And there are just some member states in the European Union where that is not part of the political culture. And I would say Germany and Austria are some of the best, or that's the worst examples of that kind of policy making. But I think we all have to be clear that this is not a problem that the EU will solve for member states. It is a problem that member states have to solve for themselves.
Interesting. Though, I mean, you know, when that's been the case in the past, if you look at energy efficiency, for instance, you know, some of the targets that were set by the EU were non-binding to member states. And so in the end, you know, the ball got passed around, but, you know, progress wasn't really made, right?
I agree.
So
I agree.
Oh,
we have to talk about binding targets, absolutely. But who decides on binding targets also as well? Member states. I mean, if the European Parliament could decide on these things on themselves, we would probably be a lot further away, or further to an actual target.
Indeed. Maybe just before we go to the questions in the chat, because there are a few. A quick one to you, Claudia. Last one. Guido raised the idea of an energy storage directive, and obviously we have a renewable energy directive, we have an energy efficiency directive. Do you think it's feasible that in the next few years we would have an energy storage directive at an EU level?
Feasible is probably the wrong question. I think it's necessary, so it has to happen. Whether or not it's feasible is a different question.
Good. Great. So going back to the chat, I see a couple of questions. One on the topic of kind of the full life cycle of value chains. So the example that I think Christoph gives is auto body for cars made out of aluminium, which are much more CO2 intensive than steel, or uniform sizes for clothes. Maybe, Laura, is that one that you want to take in terms of maybe how you evaluate as an investor kind of full life cycles of value chains and where best improvements can be found?
Yeah, sure. I really love the question, actually, because now a lot of people think about this whole chain of events that affects in the end the footprint of a company and of a product. And I think, for example, that's when I look at batteries, and especially like lithium-ion batteries, there's a big debate about like the resources that you need to make them and the positive effects that they end up with. Same for EVs, right? You need a lot of resources to build a car. Is it actually better? So what I always suggest, and what we always do when we invest in a company, is look at the whole life cycle of a company. What goes in, and what is the actual positive effect that a company creates? What does the product or service actually lead us with? And then, indeed, most important part is this actually company that will reduce the footprint if you look over the life cycle of a product or service. What are potential negative effects that you have to take into account to push this innovation or not? Definitely not an easy task with a lot of assumptions, but I think already doing it makes making the right decisions more obvious than just thinking like any clean technology is good. So I like the suggestion Christoph gives of looking at the EU level also to think about regulation that can drive uniformity and circularity. I think that's one of the recent regulatory changes of pushing recyclability and reusability of products. That's great. I think that's really something that regulation on a member state level or EU level can really help with in terms of sustainability.
One other example to give there is how the EU is starting to move from kind of defining the process to defining the end product. So we were having this discussion on the carbon pricing, for instance, where currently benchmarks are based on processes and not end products, which is keeping out kind of innovative ways of getting to the same result. So for instance, in cement, replacing clinker altogether will not only lead to a lot of energy savings, but to a lot of CO2 savings as well. But the current EU regulation is based on producing clinker, not cement. And so you have to think at a broader level to allow for these disruptors to come in and to make this this whole kind of production better. Any other feedback maybe from Guido or from Claudia on this question of whole life cycle and how the EU approaches that? If not, I can move to the next one.
Yeah, well, maybe a few words. Of course, life cycle analysis is extremely important. I think if you talk to investors today and you don't have your act together, then your chances are much lower to be successful. Yeah, so this is really a hot topic, I believe, in any innovation. As for the flow battery of Alastor, it's fully recyclable. The chemicals that are used can be reused after dismantling a battery.
Great.
I think maybe a short comment, if I may. I really believe in life cycle analysis as a way of having true competition amongst sustainable technologies or all technologies. And I think this is when somebody tells me, for example, every time we talk about car emissions, for example, they talk about technology neutrality. And I think this has become a way to beat around the bush about what we actually want to talk about, because for me, it's not about technological neutrality. It's about having a life cycle assessment comparison between different technologies. And in that regard, the truly sustainable technologies always win. It's pretty clear. And it's about true competition, but this can only happen if we're being fair and having an actual true life cycle assessment. But what I see happening sometimes when we use it is that people try to nitpick and only apply life cycle assessment to technologies where they want to be stricter than with others, where they feel a political necessity why there shouldn't be a life cycle assessment. So if we really want to have it, we have to apply it to everything.
Absolutely, which also goes back to the question that Laura was raising on free allowances, right? In terms of fair competition and kind of allowing the disruptors to come in. Claudia, I think there was one question for you directly on the chat about potentially, what can we do to reverse decisions on bringing back power generation that is coal-based in Germany. I'd like to, if that's okay with you, Cedric, just broaden the question a little bit to how do we, how do you as policymakers look at these trade-offs between having to heat homes and having to, as you say, make this transition affordable to everyone, and kind of not locking us into a kind of old energy world? I find this a very difficult question, so very keen to get your thoughts there.
It's difficult, and especially, I mean, talking about the German example, I think that the policymakers are showing huge double standards as to what they support on the European level and what they actually do in practice in their own policy decisions. I think it's simply wrong. It's a wrong calculation, and I wish they would make their calculations more transparent as to how they reach the conclusions that they would need to have certain coal-fired plants, or also even new gas installations in the next 10 to 20 years. I would love to see that. And I think it should be made more transparent, because I am sure that there will be lots of people that will explain to them that there is huge potential to go a different way, because we always have to compare with these guaranteed stranded assets that we have with new gas installations that they're building. What it could mean to have all of that money going into renewable installations that will be there in the short term. And what I don't understand, and maybe I'm the wrong person to ask, because I really don't get why they're doing this, is the only way to really scale up any new capacity in the short term, which is what we need right now when it comes to Russian dependency, is to go renewable. It's not to go into the direction of new gas installations. So I don't get it.
Guido and Laura, anything to add on this topic of how we make a faster transition to renewables, or why we even need to build more fossil fuel infrastructure? And if not, I will take you straight to our closing round.
I think we could go straight to our closing round, because I can't say this better than Claudia.
Perfect, broad alignment. So as just a quick closing round, I really love to hear from the three of you. Maybe one idea that you picked up during this panel that we're each going to go and pursue, but maybe something that you took away. It can be obviously a key technology that we can use to tackle energy independence in the EU. It could be a policy idea, but yeah, very keen to hear what is one thing that you're taking away from this discussion. Do you want to start, Laura?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think for me, the main point I'm taking away, that heat and heat networks, there's really a lot in there that can help the EU further. So I'm gonna do a real look into what's happening there and whether there's other innovations that we as Rubio could support.
Maybe I'll use that to plug one more technology. We've done a lot in this round, but Claudia, you were mentioning district heating via geothermal. Just want to flag that there are starting to be interesting European projects doing district heating based on solar heat, and one was actually got some funding from the Innovation Fund in the ETS. I'll share the link maybe in the chat as well, but want to, I guess, keep in mind.
Maybe
Guido,
that one little addition from my side, because I forgot to mention it, I think, but the iron fuel technology company I mentioned, they are actually doing a pilot now with one of the largest Dutch heat districts to see whether they can provide baseload, because heat districts are obviously looking for sustainable alternatives. So perhaps for Claudia, if you look for examples of what's happening out there, it's an interesting example. I can share the press message somewhere.
All right. Thanks, Laura. With 1 minute left, Guido and Claudia, what are your key takeaways from this discussion?
Yeah, maybe for me, two sentences. Yeah, really happy to hear, especially from Claudia, representing the EU, that that storage is at least on the agenda, and that this has been recognized how important that really is. I wonder what the role of EU exactly then is, as this is also mentioned to be a national thing to be solved.
Yeah, good question to explore. Claudia, you get to close the discussion.
Yeah. It's been very inspirational, and I have lots of new examples, and I took screenshots all the time of everything that was posted in the chat. So I have a lot to read up on, and I love rounds like this because it shows that there is a paradigm shift happening in the way that we talk about renewables, the potential, and the diversity of fascinating technology that is out there. And that the difference, one of the differences amongst the many others, is that the future will be a lot more colorful when it comes to technology and the potential there, and it will be hugely competitive and innovative as a result. And I'm really looking forward to living in that world.
Fantastic closing words. Thank you so much, Claudia, for being with us. And thanks again to the team at the European Liberal Forum for hosting this discussion. Hope we get to have the next one very soon. Bye, everyone.